I never thought it would be my son-in-law who'd mock the limp I earned saving 30 kids, but now I'll be damned if he doesn't regret it. It was a quiet Thursday evening in October, the kind of evening that trickled by unnoticed. The leaves outside were turning shades of burnt orange, and the air had that cool, crisp bite to it typical of fall in Texas. The house smelled like turkey and stuffing, Clara's idea of the perfect Thanksgiving. My daughter had worked hard on it, as she always did, trying to hold the family together despite the cracks we all knew were there. But it wasn't the holiday that made my heart race. It was Derek. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. Derek had been sitting at the head of the table like he owned the place, smirking in his crisp button-down shirt, his shiny shoes reflecting the soft glow of the chandelier above. He always wore that smile like it was something he had earned, but in truth he didn't know what it meant to earn anything. Not the way I had. The dinner had been uncomfortable from the start, the tension thick between Derek and me. I could feel his eyes on me the moment I walked in. But I didn't bite. I didn't rise to his provocation. Not until it came out of nowhere. "What's with the limp, old man? Running late for your big hero speech?" Derek's voice rang out, carrying the kind of arrogance only someone who had never had to sacrifice a damned thing could manage. The room fell silent for a moment. Clara froze mid-bite, her fork suspended in midair, looking between us with confusion. I should have said something, but all I could feel was the rush of heat surging up from my chest. My heart clenched, my pulse pounding in my ears. My limp, the one that had been with me for years, the one I earned when I crawled through hell to pull 30 children out of a war zone. But to Derek, it was just a joke, a prop, a reason to laugh. The words hit harder than I expected, slicing through the thin skin of my composure. I could feel the weight of every second of pain and sacrifice, every step I'd taken on that mission, crashing into me all over again. Clara tried to smooth it over, the tension clearly written across her face. "Derek, stop it. He's been through a lot, you know that." But Derek, ever the charming manipulator, waved her off dismissively. "Oh, come on, it's just a joke. Don't be so sensitive, Dad." His eyes flicked toward me with that same arrogant gleam, like I was a relic, a joke. Dad. He only used that word when it was convenient. A mockery, nothing more. I stayed silent, pretending to take it in stride, pretending to laugh it off. But inside, the fire was burning. I didn't say anything. Not immediately. I couldn't, not with Clara and the kids watching. But as I stepped away from the table to collect myself, the words still hung in the air like smoke. The more I thought about them, the more they stung. Derek didn't just insult me. He insulted everything I stood for, everything I had sacrificed. For him to mock me, mock my limp. It wasn't just disrespect. It was a declaration that he saw me as weak, insignificant. I leaned against the window in the living room, staring out into the quiet fall night. The house, with all its warmth and light, suddenly felt cold. I was reminded of a time long before Derek came into our lives. A time when I was respected. When my past meant something. But here I was, standing alone in my own daughter's home, feeling like an afterthought. I had learned to live with the limp. It wasn't just a reminder of the war, it was a reminder of what I had done. But now it felt like a target. A joke for Derek to hide behind. But what he didn't know was that his words, those few little jabs, had changed everything. They were the spark, the flame, and I was ready to watch it burn. That night I couldn't sleep. The mockery kept echoing in my head over and over. It wasn't the limp that hurt anymore. It was the disrespect, but I wasn't going to let that slide. Not anymore. The next day I started paying attention. I had always been good at picking up on the little things, the small details people thought they could hide. Derek wasn't as careful as he thought. Every word he said, every deal he made, every transaction that didn't quite add up, there was something there, something I could use. I noticed the receipts, the unauthorized withdrawals from the family business, the discrepancies in the ledger that didn't make sense. Derek had been skimming from the company for months, maybe longer. And the worst part, he thought no one was watching. He thought he was untouchable. But I had seen it all, and I was going to make sure the world saw it too. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. It was about restoring what he had stolen from me. My dignity, my respect. Derek might have thought he was clever, but he didn't know the first thing about real consequences. I started collecting everything. Every receipt, every transaction, every bit of evidence. The more I found, the more determined I became. I wasn't just going to confront him. I was going to expose him for what he really was. The quiet life I had settled into was over. Derek's mockery had woken something in me, a fire I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. This was just the beginning. After the dinner, I couldn't shake off the feeling. It wasn't just that Derek had mocked me. No, it was the weight of what it represented. Every inch of that limp, every step I took, was a reminder of the life I'd lived, the things I'd done, and Derek, with all his arrogance, had reduced it to a punchline. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake in bed, listening to the silence, staring at the ceiling, unable to quiet the thoughts that swirled around in my head. How could he do that? How could he mock me, after everything? But it wasn't just that. It was the realization that this wasn't the first time he'd treated me like this. Derek had been undermining me for months, always with a smile, always wrapped in the guise of just kidding. But now I saw it for what it was, a calculated move to chip away at my dignity piece by piece. He thought he could belittle me, make me the joke of the family. But the truth was, I'd spent my life fighting to be more than that, and I wasn't about to let him take it all away. I turned over in bed, staring at the photo of me with Clara on her wedding day that hung on the wall beside me. She looked so happy, so innocent. But the moment Derek came into her life, everything changed. The man she married wasn't the man I thought he was. And every time I'd raised my concerns, every time I'd tried to warn her, she brushed me off. Derek had woven a web of lies so thick around her that she couldn't see what he truly was. I needed to fix that. I needed her to see the truth, even if it cost me my relationship with her. That's the thing about revenge. It's never as simple as just getting back at someone. There's always a cost. And I was starting to realize that, as much as I hated it, the cost might just be my family. But I couldn't stop. Not now. Not after everything I'd endured. Not after Derek had taken everything from me with his mocking words. So I decided to do what I do best. Observe. The next morning, I sat in my small shop, working on an old Buick someone had dropped off for repairs. My hands were steady as I worked, but my mind was far from the engine in front of me. I had my plan. Derek had made the mistake of thinking I was just some washed-up war hero. The limp, the quiet life. I was a relic to him. But what he didn't understand was that I was still sharp. I knew how to dig, how to search for things people thought they could hide. I had spent years in war zones learning how to find the smallest details, the most hidden truths, and now I was going to use that skill against him. I started small, gathering information, following leads, piecing things together. The family business, which Derek had been controlling, was a mess. The finances were chaotic, the books didn't add up, and there were transactions that shouldn't have been there. I dug deeper and found evidence of embezzlement, money missing from accounts, unauthorized purchases, business deals that didn't make sense. It was all there, hiding in plain sight, and Derek thought no one would notice. The first bit of evidence was a receipt. A small one tucked away in the drawer of the office desk where Derek had been working the night before. A $3,000 transaction. Not huge, but not insignificant either. I took a photo of it, careful not to disturb the documents around it. There was no way he could explain it away. It was a start. I slid the photo into my jacket pocket and went home, thinking about how to proceed. But as I sat down for dinner, something gnawed at me. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about Derek's betrayal. This wasn't just about the money he had stolen from the business. No, this was about something deeper. This was about his need to tear me down, to make me small, and that's what hurt the most. Derek hadn't just stolen from the business. He had stolen my dignity. But that was something I was going to take back. The following week, I spent more time in the office, taking note of anything that seemed off. I watched Derek's movements, listened to his conversations. He wasn't as careful as he thought. The cracks in his perfect little life were showing, and I could feel the walls starting to close in on him. The more I gathered, the more I realized this wasn't just going to be a quick strike. This was going to take time, precision, and careful planning. But every move I made, every piece of evidence I uncovered, brought me one step closer to exposing Derek for who he really was. That's when I made my first real move. I called Jerry. I didn't waste any time. The pieces were slowly coming together, but I knew I couldn't move too fast. Derek's arrogance made him careless, but it also made him dangerous. He had no idea I was watching, no idea that the simple receipts he tossed around would become the keys to his downfall. I spent the next few days digging. A week passed before I found something bigger, a ledger entry for a business transaction that didn't match anything in the company's official records. It was small at first, just a blip in the financials, but when I cross-referenced it with a few other files, the picture started to emerge. Derek was moving money, his own money, through the company, laundering it bit by bit. I kept everything close. I couldn't afford to make a mistake, couldn't afford to let Derek know I was onto him. Every document I gathered, every piece of evidence was carefully tucked away. Clara had no idea. She still didn't know that Derek was slowly pulling the strings behind the scenes. She had no clue how far gone he was. The thought of telling her crossed my mind more than once. But each time I hesitated, she would never believe it. Not about Derek, not her husband. So I played the quiet game. I gathered evidence, waited for the right moment to strike. But Derek, he wasn't waiting. He was getting cocky. The more I watched him, the more I saw how careless he was becoming. One afternoon, I overheard him on the phone. A conversation I wasn't meant to hear. Tell them we need a bit more time. They won't catch on, trust me. I know how to cover it up. Derek's voice was low, almost a whisper. But it was enough for me to hear the tension in his words. Enough for me to know he was about to slip up. I made my move. I called Jerry that night, my old friend and the one man who understood the weight of what I was doing. Jerry had always been the one to remind me that revenge wasn't as sweet as it seemed, that it came with consequences. But this was different. This was about justice. Got something big, I told him. When he picked up the phone, Derek's been siphoning off money from the business. I've got the proof. Are you sure? You know you're playing with fire, Cruz, Jerry said, his voice laced with concern. I'm sure. This time there's but no turning back, I replied. I'm going to expose him. Jerry was silent for a long moment. He knew what that meant. Be careful, Cruz. You go down that path. There's no coming back from it. You know that. I wasn't sure if he was warning me about Derek or about myself, but I couldn't stop now. The next day I headed to the office early. It was quiet, no one else around, no one but me and the stacks of paper I was about to sift through. I took my time, going through every file, every receipt, every document I had collected over the past week. I was careful, meticulous. Derek thought he was untouchable, but I was about to prove him wrong. By noon I had what I needed, a stack of invoices, documents, and bank statements, all showing the same thing. Derek had been skimming from the business for months. Money moved in and out, unauthorized loans made to shell companies, all funneling back into Derek's personal account. It was all there. Every lie, every dollar, every deceit. It wasn't just the business that was at risk. It was everything. Derek had been stealing from the family he claimed to care about. I slid the stack of papers into a manila envelope and sealed it tight. I didn't know how much longer I could keep this up, but I knew one thing for sure: Derek had underestimated me. And when I was ready, I was going to expose him for the fraud he truly was. Later that evening, I sat down with Clara. She didn't notice the tension in my voice, didn't pick up on the way I avoided her gaze. Maybe she just didn't want to see it. Clara, I said, pushing the envelope across the table to her, you need to look at this. She frowned, confusion flickering across her face. What is it, Dad? Derek. Everything he's been hiding. The money, the lies, everything. She stared at the envelope for a long time, her hand hovering above it, but she didn't open it. Dad, what is this about? What's going on? You need to know the truth, Clara. Derek is robbing you blind, robbing the family, the company. Her face tightened, but she didn't set open the envelope. Dad, stop. You start blowing this out of proportion. Derek wouldn't set do that. Do you really think I'd lie about this? I asked, my voice low. She finally reached for the envelope, tearing it open, pulling out the documents one by one. I watched her face change as she flipped through them, her eyes widening with disbelief. Her hand trembled as she read the last document. I don't believe this, she whispered. Sep's been doing this for months? I nodded. It sets all there, all the proof you need. Clara looked up at me, her face pale. I don't know what to say, Dad. Don't say anything. Just think. Think about everything Sep's done. She stood up, walking to the window, staring out into the backyard where the kids were playing. I don't know if I can believe this. I could see the pain in her eyes, the hurt of seeing the man she loved for so many years in a completely different light. It wasn't going to be easy for her to accept, but it didn't matter. The truth was out. Now it was just a matter of when. The days following the revelation were a blur. Clara had barely spoken to me after I showed her the evidence. I understood her shock, her disbelief. It was all too much for anyone to process in one go. But even so, there was a cold knot of dread in my stomach. I wasn't sure whether it was because of the truth I had laid bare or because I knew there was no going back from this. The truth always comes at a price, and this one felt like it was going to be steep. I knew I had to keep my head clear. Stay focused. Derek hadn't given up yet. He never would. He was too proud, too arrogant to just roll over. So I kept collecting. The evidence was there, but I needed more. I needed to make sure that when the time came, Derek wouldn't have a leg to stand on. I spent hours going over every financial transaction Derek had made, pulling up old receipts and invoices, tracking the hidden accounts that funneled money out of the business. Each new piece of evidence felt like another nail in his coffin. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized this wasn't just about money anymore. Derek had been living a double life, one I hadn't even seen. There were payments to people I didn't recognize, offshore accounts, shady dealings. One evening, as I was sifting through some older business files in the office, I found something that made my blood run cold. It was an email, a simple one but damning enough. The subject line read, "Final transaction. Derek's personal loan." I opened it, reading through the details. Derek had taken a loan out in the name of the family business, but the funds never made it into the company account. Instead, they went into his personal account, his private stash. I made a note of the amount, $50,000. It was a small sum compared to some of the other transfers, but it was significant enough to show Derek's pattern. He had been using the company as his personal piggy bank for years. But this loan was a direct violation of the trust the family had placed in him. I printed the email, slipped it into my jacket pocket, and walked out the door. The next day I sat down with Jerry again. The man had been my rock during all of this, but even he could see that things were getting out of hand. "Have got him, Jerry," I said, tossing the printout onto the table. $50,000, just like that. I sent closing in on him. Jerry leaned forward, his eyes scanning the email. He didn't speak for a long time, just rubbed his temples like he was trying to figure out if there was a way to stop what was coming. "You start playing a dangerous game, Cruz," Jerry said finally, his voice steady but filled with concern. "You can just expose him and walk away. This is going to change everything, for everyone." "I know that, Jerry. But it's not just about me anymore," I said. It's about the family business, about what Derek's done to all of us. You know that." He sighed and sat back, the weight of the situation settling in the space between us. "I said I'm with you, Cruz, but you better be damn sure that you can live with whatever comes next." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I had already made up my mind. There was no turning back now. A few days later, I ran into Derek at the office. He was acting like everything was normal, his usual smug self, talking about the latest projects he was working on, asking if I'd finished up some small task he'd asked me to do. It made my skin crawl. The way he just acted like everything was fine, like he hadn't just stolen from the business, from Clara, from all of us, but I wasn't going to confront him just yet. No, I needed more. The evidence was stacking up, but I couldn't expose him too early. I needed him to slip. I needed him to make one more mistake, and that mistake came sooner than I expected. Late one evening, I overheard Derek talking to someone on the phone. I couldn't make out everything he said, but there was one part that stood out clearly. We need to push the payments through before anyone notices. I'll take care of it, just make sure the transaction goes through by the end of the week. No one can know. The words echoed in my mind as I stood there hiding in the hallway, my heart pounding. He thought he was talking to someone he trusted, someone on his side, but I knew better. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. This was the piece of the puzzle that would tie everything together. I quietly took my phone from my pocket, hit record, and captured every word. The sound of his voice, the sharp, confident way he spoke. It was the final confirmation I needed. By the time I sat down with Clara again, I was ready. I had everything. The money, the receipts, the emails, the audio recording. It wasn't just about exposing Derek for his financial crimes anymore. It was about showing Clara who Derek really was, the man who had been lying to her, the man who had been manipulating her for years. She listened as I laid it all out, every detail, every piece of evidence. Her face was pale, her hands shaking as she held the documents I handed her. Her lips trembled as she looked at me, then at the pile of evidence, then back at me. "I don't know what to say, Dad," she whispered. "How could I have been so blind?" "You were nest but blind, Clara," I said, my voice soft but firm. "You were just in love. And love sometimes makes us see things we don't want to see." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't say anything. She just looked at the papers in front of her, unable to comprehend the full scope of what Derek had done. And as I watched her struggle, a part of me felt the weight of it all. The family, the lies, the pain. The revenge was coming, but the cost of it was more than I ever imagined. The following week dragged on. Each day felt like an eternity, as if the clock itself had slowed down just to test my patience. But I knew the time was coming. The evidence was overwhelming now, and Derek's arrogance was starting to crumble beneath the weight of it all. I watched him from a distance, moving through his days as if nothing had changed, but the cracks were growing. The way he would check his phone every few minutes, his nervous glances whenever someone mentioned the family business. It was clear he knew something was wrong, but he had no idea just how deep the hole he'd dug himself into really was. I had already made the decision to expose him, but I needed the right moment. I couldn't do it in private, not when the stakes were this high. No, I had to do it in front of everyone, family, friends, the people who trusted him, the people who had been deceived by him for so long. Thanksgiving dinner was the perfect stage. It was a family tradition. Clara, Derek, the kids, and a handful of extended family members. Derek was always at the center, always commanding the conversation, always trying to impress everyone with his success. This year, though, things were going to be different. I had everything prepared. The receipts, the emails, the bank statements, and most importantly, the audio recording of Derek's conversation about covering up the payments. Everything I needed was right there, ready to be shown. I had rehearsed what I was going to say in my head for days, but when the time came, I knew it would be more than just a speech. This was my moment of justice. As the dinner began, I played the role of the quiet, supportive father, the one who smiled politely, who made small talk with the kids, who helped Clara in the kitchen. But inside I was tense, every muscle wound up in anticipation. Derek, as usual, was sitting at the head of the table, his chest puffed out like he owned the place, his confidence radiating from every word he spoke. I knew he wasn't worried. He thought everything was under control, but he had no idea what was coming. I waited until dessert was being served. The table was full of laughter, the clinking of glasses, the smells of pumpkin pie and cinnamon in the air. It was the perfect moment. Derek was bragging about some recent success at work, his voice loud and boisterous like he always did. It was time. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor as I pushed it back. The room fell silent almost immediately, and every eye turned toward me. I looked at Derek first, his face still confident, but now with a hint of unease creeping in. He didn't know it yet, but the walls were closing in. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the envelope I had been holding onto for days. the one filled with receipts, emails, and evidence that would expose everything. I placed it on the table in front of him, my hands steady despite the pounding in my chest. Derek, I said, my voice calm but firm, I think it's such time you face the truth. His smile faltered, just for a second. What seps this about, Cruz? The truth about your little business dealings, about how you've been stealing from the family, from all of us, I said, my voice cutting through the air like a knife. Clara looked between us, her face pale. Dad, what are you talking about? I didn't yet take my eyes off Derek. Everything. The loans you took out in the company SEPA's name, the money you has been funneling into your own pockets, the lies you Sepha's been telling everyone. Derek's eyes darted around the table, looking for a way out. But it was too late. I opened the envelope and pulled out the stack of papers, sliding them across the table for everyone to see. I've got all the proof right here, Derek. The bank statements, the emails, the phone calls. It's all here. Id. Clara picked up the first piece of paper, her hands shaking as she read it. No, no, this consent be real. It's up's real, I said quietly, watching her face change as the weight of the evidence settled in. She looked up at Derek, her eyes filled with disbelief. How could you do this? To us? To me? Derek tried to recover, his face going red. This is all just a misunderstanding. I can explain everything. You don't need to explain anything, I said. It's just all right there. The lies, the theft, the manipulation. Yusef been living off our backs for years. The room was dead silent now. Even the kids had stopped eating, sensing the tension in the air. Derek's mask of confidence had fallen away, leaving nothing but a man who knew he was caught. Clara stood up, tears in her eyes. How long, Derek? How long have you been doing this? Clara, please, Derek said, his voice pleading now. You don't just understand. I didn't send Mean for any of this to happen. I was just trying to protect us, protect the family. Everything I did was for us. For us? Clara Sip's voice cracked. You've been stealing from us. You've been lying to me, to my father, to everyone. I watched as Clara stepped away from Derek, her back turned toward him. Her hands were shaking, and her face was a mixture of anger and hurt. Derek reached out, but she pulled away, her eyes filled with betrayal. Hespam done, Derek, Clara said, her voice steady, but the pain was clear. I can set do this any more. And just like that, the man who had once seemed untouchable, who had controlled everything, was losing it all. His reputation, his marriage, his life, everything was crumbling in front of him. But for me? For me, the weight that had been sitting on my chest for so long, the anger and frustration, it started to lift. Justice was being served, and the truth had finally come out. It wasn't easy. It wasn't painless. But it was necessary. I turned to Jerry, who had been standing in the corner, silently watching the entire scene unfold. His eyes met mine, and he nodded. It wasn't just about Derek anymore. It was about all of us. The family that had been manipulated, the lives that had been destroyed. This was our chance to heal. The days after the Thanksgiving dinner felt like a blur, but everything had changed. Derek's world, the one he had so carefully crafted, was collapsing. He tried to keep up appearances, but the cracks were too big to hide. The man who had once prided himself on being the center of attention was now running from the truth, grasping at whatever shreds of his life remained. Clara wouldn't speak to him. Not really. She'd moved out of their bedroom, staying in the guest room, while Derek tried to salvage something, anything. His usual bravado had been replaced by a quiet desperation. A man who knew he was beaten but was too proud to admit it. I didn't care about him anymore. Not after everything he had done. The betrayal, the lies, the way he'd manipulated Clara and the family for years. It was hard to see him like this. But it wasn't sympathy I felt. It was something much colder, satisfaction. Derek's downfall didn't happen all at once. There were rumors first, whispers behind closed doors. Then it started to show up in the papers. His name was attached to the scandal. The embezzlement, the fraudulent loans, the lies, it all came to light bit by bit. Every article, every report, every phone call Derek tried to make, the more he fell. He tried to deny it, tried to claim that it was all a mistake, a misunderstanding. but the evidence was too much. The family business was under investigation. People started pulling out of deals. His friends, if you could even call them that, began distancing themselves. Derek was left with nothing but the wreckage of his own creation. Clara, on the other hand, was finally starting to breathe again. She'd always been loyal to Derek, always made excuses for him, but now the truth was out. I watched her from a distance, my heart aching for her. She was broken, yes, but she was also healing. It wasn't easy, it never would be, but she was reclaiming her life, slowly but surely. She came to me one afternoon, after she had been through the worst of it. We sat on the porch, the same porch where we'd spent so many family nights before Derek came into the picture. The air was cool, the sun setting low over the horizon, casting a golden light on everything. But there was no warmth between us. Not yet. Dad, Clara said, her voice quiet, filled with uncertainty. I could see the weight in her eyes, the shame, the guilt. She had loved Derek. She had given everything to him, and now the person she thought she knew, the man she thought she married, had turned out to be a stranger. You stir stronger than you think, I told her. You still find your way. You always do. She looked down at her hands, the tears finally spilling over. I should have known. I should have seen it. How could I have been so blind? You weren't set blind, Clara. You were in love, and love sometimes makes us forget what sets right in front of us. I paused, reaching out to place my hand on hers. This isn't set your fault. You didn't set choose this. She nodded but didn't speak. I could feel the distance between us. It wasn't the distance of anger or resentment. It was the distance of grief. We were both mourning, but for different reasons. She was mourning the life she thought she had with Derek, and I was mourning the daughter I had lost to him. But there was hope now. I could see it in her eyes. The hope wasn't for Derek. It was for her. Meanwhile, Derek was spiraling. His phone calls became more frantic, his attempts to cover up his actions more desperate. But there was no stopping the tide of justice that was rolling toward him. The family business was in jeopardy, but his empire was crumbling. He tried to salvage what he could, tried to save face, but it was too late. He came to see me one afternoon, his face pale, his clothes disheveled. There was a nervous energy about him. He had never looked so small, so vulnerable. He stood on the edge of the porch, staring at me through the screen door, unsure of whether to enter. I need to talk to you, he said, his voice trembling. I didn't move. What sep's there to talk about? I didn't said mean for any of this to happen, he stammered. I never thought it would get this far. Please, Cruz, you've got to help me. You know how it is. You know how hard it is to keep everything together. I could see the desperation in his eyes. The man who had once been so confident, so self-assured, was now a broken shell of himself. It didn't feel like victory. It didn't feel like closure. It felt like watching a man drown in his own lies. You made your bed, Derek, I said, finally meeting his gaze. Now you get to lie in it. His face contorted with frustration, anger, and fear. I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't ask for it to go this far. He took a step closer, his voice rising. I did it for the family. I did it for Clara. Don't you see that? I was trying to protect us. Protect? I snapped. You've been taking from us. You've been taking from Clara, from the business, from everyone who trusted you, and you don't even care. You never cared. He recoiled, as if the words had physically hit him. He opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off. It's over, Derek. It's all over. Later that evening, Clara and I had another conversation. She was stronger now, no longer the woman she had been months ago. She was taking her life back, piece by piece, like a puzzle she was learning to put together again. I've done with him, Dad, she said softly. It's over. I know, I replied. And that's okay. It's time to move on. Clara nodded, tears still in her eyes, but there was a strength behind them now. I'm going to be okay. I smiled, knowing that despite everything that had happened, we were going to be okay too. The family would heal, and maybe, just maybe, we could start over. But as Derek's world crumbled, I realized something. Revenge hadn't been about hurting him. It had been about healing the wounds that had been left open for too long. And now, finally, the healing had begun. The final dinner was fast approaching. Another Thanksgiving was on the horizon. But this one would be unlike any other. This time Derek wouldn't be in control. He wouldn't be the center of attention, pulling the strings, smiling his way through every conversation, convincing everyone he was the man they all thought he was. No, this time it was my turn. And this time Derek would face the consequences of his lies, his greed and his betrayal. The house was still filled with tension, though it was quieter now. Clara had moved back into our room away from Derek, but she was still trying to process everything. She hadn't fully come to terms with the fact that the man she had married had destroyed everything he touched. But I saw her strength beginning to shine through, bit by bit. She was learning to see things for what they were, and that was the hardest part of the whole ordeal. But Derek? Derek was still in denial. He thought he could talk his way out of it, fix the mess he had created. He was still calling lawyers, still trying to cover up his tracks, still trying to play the victim. But no matter how much he tried, there was no escape from the truth. Thanksgiving dinner arrived, and the air was thick with the weight of what was about to happen. The table was set, the food was laid out, but no one had the appetite for it. The kids, too young to understand the full scope of things, had gone quiet. It was Clara and me who felt the burden of it all, the burden of seeing everything we had once held dear shattered. And Derek, for all his bluster, knew it. He knew the truth had come out, and he couldn't stop it. He still tried to act like everything was normal, but I could see the cracks in his facade. His smile was forced, his movements stiff, like he was playing a part in a play he wasn't prepared for. I knew the time had come. We all sat down at the same table where so many family meals had been shared over the years. The warmth from the food barely reached my skin, the chill of the moment sinking deeper. Everyone was silent, waiting, unsure of what would happen next. Clara sat beside me, her hand in mine, but her eyes were on Derek, waiting for him to speak. Derek shifted in his seat, his eyes darting around the room. He cleared his throat and forced a chuckle. Well, it's good to be here, isn't it? Family together, enjoying a nice meal. But it wasn't. It wasn't good. The tension in the room was palpable, the unspoken truth hanging over all of us. I could feel it pressing down on my chest, the weight of the moment heavy in the air. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. Clara's eyes snapped to me, her breath catching in her throat. She knew what was coming. I took a deep breath and looked at Derek, then at everyone at the table. I had been waiting for this moment for months, planning every detail, every word, and now it was time to lay it all bare. I think it's up to time we talk, I said, my voice low but steady. It's up to time to talk about the truth, the lies, the money, the betrayal. Claire's eyes widened, and I saw a flicker of fear in Derek's eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand, silencing him. I'm done, I said firmly. Done pretending that everything is okay. Done pretending that Derek hasn't stolen from this family, from all of us. The room went dead silent. The weight of my words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Clara's hand tightened around mine, and I could feel her body tense beside me. Derek, on the other hand, had gone pale. He looked like a man caught in a storm he couldn't control. You don't know what you start talking about, Derek said quickly, trying to recover, trying to maintain the little bit of composure he had left. This is ridiculous, Cruz. You've got it all wrong. I took out the manila envelope, the one I had been carrying around for days. I had waited for the right moment, the right time to expose everything, and this was it. I placed it in front of Derek, the evidence of his deceit, of his manipulation, of his theft. This is what I have been talking about, I said, my voice sharp. You've been stealing from this family, from the business. You've been embezzling, lying, and hiding it all. And now it's all out in the open. I slid the papers toward him, one by one, as he stared at them in disbelief. No, no, this isn't true, he stammered, his voice cracking. Yes, it's true, Derek, I said, my voice unwavering. It's all true, and now the truth is finally out. You can lie your way out of this anymore. Clara stood up, her face pale, tears welling up in her eyes. How could you do this, Derek? She whispered. How could you betray us like this? Derek looked at her, his face contorting with frustration and guilt. Clara, please, I didn't set mean for any of this to happen. I never wanted it to go this far. I just I just wanted to protect us, protect the family. Protect us? Clara Sift's voice broke. You said been stealing from us. You said been lying to me, to my father, to everyone. And you think you were protecting us? I watched as the mask Derek had worn for so long finally cracked. He was no longer the confident man who had walked into this house that morning. He was broken. The weight of his lies, his actions had caught up with him. And for the first time, I saw it, the real Derek. The man who had been lying to us all, the man who had betrayed everyone who had ever trusted him. Clara stepped back from the table, her face a mixture of anger and heartbreak. I can't do this anymore, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Derek stood up, his hands raised in a futile attempt to defend himself. Clara, Donsette, please. But it was too late. Clara had already made up her mind. She walked out of the room, her head held high, but the weight of the moment heavy in her steps. And Derek, standing alone in the center of the room, was left with nothing but the destruction he had caused. For me, the justice wasn't in seeing Derek fall. It wasn't in watching him lose everything. The justice was in the truth finally being exposed. The justice was in Clara seeing who Derek truly was, and knowing that she was free of his lies. In the end, it wasn't about revenge. It was about peace. Peace for me, peace for Clara, and peace for the family we were going to rebuild from the wreckage. The aftermath of Thanksgiving was quiet. Too quiet. Derek was gone, his things packed up and removed from the house. Clara was in a daze, still processing everything, but there was something different about her. She was no longer the woman who had been manipulated by Derek's lies. She was broken, yes, but she was also free. The weight of the betrayal was still heavy, but I could see it. The shift in her, the way she carried herself. It was as if she had shed a skin, one that had been suffocating her for too long. But it wasn't easy. There was no simple fix to what Derek had done, no way to just brush it off and pretend it hadn't happened. The truth had come out, but with it came the pain, the scars that would take time to heal. Clara spent days in silence, barely speaking to anyone. I watched her struggle, saw her trying to make sense of the wreckage Derek had left behind, the money, the lies, the broken trust. It was all too much, but I knew she would get through it. I just didn't know how long it would take. And me. I was still processing the consequences of my own actions. The revenge I had set in motion was done, but the emotional cost was beginning to sink in. I had told myself it was about justice, that it was the right thing to do, and in many ways it was, but justice didn't come without a price. I found myself sitting alone in the garage more often than not. The hum of the air compressor, the smell of oil and gasoline. It was familiar, grounding, but the silence was deafening. It wasn't the first time I had been alone, but it felt different now. The business that had once been a haven for me, the place where I could escape the world, now felt like an empty shell. I thought back to the day when I first met Clara, when she was just a little girl full of dreams and laughter. She had been my rock, the one thing I had left after the war, and now I had failed her. I had helped expose Derek for what he was, but in doing so I had torn apart the family she had built with him. It wasn't supposed to end like this. Clara came to me a week later, her eyes red from crying, her face drawn. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, her hands clasped tightly together. I don't know if I can forgive him, Dad, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can ever trust anyone again. I looked at her, seeing the pain in her eyes, the conflict that had taken root in her heart. I know, sweetheart. I know it sips hard, but you sip strong. You sip always been strong. I thought I knew him, she said, her voice cracking. I thought I knew who Derek was, and now, I don't even recognize him. I nodded. That sip's the hardest part of it all. When the person you trust the most turns out to be the one who sip's been lying to you the whole time. She sniffled, wiping her eyes. But how do I move on from this? How do I just let go of everything I thought was real? I reached across the table and took her hand. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to happen overnight. But you have to start with yourself. You have to start with forgiveness. Not for him, but for you. You can keep carrying this weight. You have to let it go. She looked at me, searching my face for the answers she needed. But how do I forgive him? How do I move on? Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, Clara. It doesn't mean excusing what he did, but it means freeing yourself from the hold he has on you. It means reclaiming your peace, your happiness, your life, and that starts with you. She sat back in her chair, her hands still clenched in her lap. I slept scared, Dad. I slept scared I slept never be the same again. You will be. It just takes time, I said softly. Yous have been through something no one should ever have to go through, but you are stronger than you think. You are going to find yourself again, and you are going to be okay. Days turned into weeks, and slowly things began to settle. Derek's name disappeared from the headlines. His fall from grace a distant memory for most, but not for Clara, not for me. The damage had been done, and it wasn't something that could just be forgotten. But what we were learning to do slowly was rebuild. Clara started spending more time at the shop, working alongside me as we went through the routine of the business. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was a start. And as we worked together, I saw the light coming back into her eyes. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me going. And then there was Derek, the man who had torn our family apart. The man who had stolen everything he could was gone from our lives for good. His reputation was ruined, his wealth stripped away, his marriage destroyed. I didn't feel triumph over his fall, though. I didn't feel anything but emptiness. The cost of revenge had been higher than I expected, and the victory wasn't as sweet as I had imagined. Clara was healing, but it would take time. I was healing too. The wounds Derek had left on our family were deep, but they were starting to close. And maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to move forward. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to happen overnight, but the seeds of hope were beginning to take root. And me? I was finally starting to feel like I could breathe again. The quiet life I had once longed for was now within reach. But I knew one thing for certain: it would never be the same. Nothing ever would be. But that didn't have to be a bad thing. It had been a few months since Thanksgiving, since the moment Derek's life had completely unraveled. The holidays had come and gone, and while the wounds in our family were slowly starting to heal, there was still a lingering tension in the air. The weight of what we'd all been through hung over us like a shadow. But it was different now. Clara was stronger, more confident. She was finding herself again, and though the road was long, there was light at the end of it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Derek had fallen, but it hadn't felt like closure. It wasn't about the justice anymore. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming what we had lost. But there was still a part of me that needed to look Derek in the eye one last time. So I called him. It was a simple message. Just a request to meet. I didn't expect much, and frankly, I didn't care what he had to say. But I needed this. I needed to face him, to see him for the man he had become. It wasn't about forgiveness. It wasn't about making amends. It was about taking that final step, the one that would allow me to close the door on the past. The meeting was set for a quiet cafe, a neutral place, away from the house and the business. I arrived early, sitting at a corner table, watching the cars drive by, the world continuing as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Everything. When Derek walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. His face had aged in those few months. The once pristine suit he'd worn with pride now rumpled. His posture hunched in defeat. He was no longer the confident man who had looked down on me, who had belittled me. He was broken, the weight of his own actions pulling him down. He saw me sitting at the table, and for a moment he hesitated. I watched him gather his thoughts before walking over. He sat down across from me, but there was no arrogance in his eyes anymore. Only regret. Only fear. "I didn't think you'd actually agree to meet," Derek said, his voice low, almost defeated. "Why would I not?" I asked, my tone flat. I wasn't here for sympathy. I wasn't here to make him feel better. I was here for one thing: closure. I don't even know where to start," he said. running a hand through his disheveled hair. I guess, I guess I just wanted to apologize. I raised an eyebrow. You think an apology is going to fix this? No, Derek said quickly, shaking his head. I know accept's not enough. I know nothing can fix what I accept done. But I need you to know, Cruz, I never meant for it to go this far. I never wanted to hurt you, or Clara, or anyone. I looked at him, searching his face for any sign of sincerity. But there was none. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. All the apologies in the world couldn't erase the damage he'd done, couldn't undo the lies and the manipulation. You have done more than just hurt us, Derek, I said, my voice steady. You have destroyed everything. The trust, the family, the business. You don't get to just apologize and walk away from that. He sighed, his shoulders slumping further. I know, and I deserve everything that Seffen's happening to me. I don't Seffen's expect anyone to forgive me. I wanted you to know that I Seffen's sorry for what I did to Clara, for what I did to you. I sat back in my chair, staring at him. The apology doesn't change anything. What matters now is the damage you Steph caused. It's is done. It's over. Derek looked at me, his eyes finally showing something I hadn't seen before, guilt. Real guilt. I never thought I sipped lose her, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I never thought I sipped lose Clara. I stared at him, and for the first time I saw the man he had been, the man he wanted to be, but it was too late. Clara was already moving on. She was rebuilding, and Derek was nothing but a shadow of what he had once been. You lost her because of your own choices. I said, my words harsh but true. You didn't just lose her, Derek. You lost everything, and it sets no one sets fault but your own. For a long moment, we sat in silence. Derek looked at me, his face a mixture of anger and regret. He knew I was right. He knew it was over. There was no coming back from this. I know, he whispered. I know. And I don't expect you to feel sorry for me. I don't expect anything from you. Good, I said, my voice steady. Because the only person who can fix this is you. But you said burned every bridge. You said destroyed everything. And now it's Seb's time to deal with the consequences. As Derek stood to leave, I didn't say anything else. There was nothing left to say. He had fallen, and there was no redemption for him. He had to face the reality of his actions, and I wasn't going to help him escape it. I watched him walk out of the cafe, his shoulders hunched, his steps slow, and for the first time I felt a strange sense of peace. It wasn't about winning. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, and justice had been served. Clara had her life back. I had mine, and the family was healing. Slowly but surely, the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it would be ours to walk, and that was all that mattered. The days after meeting Derek felt oddly peaceful. A strange kind of calm had settled over me, and for the first time in months I could breathe without that constant weight pressing down on my chest. The final chapter had closed, and though it wasn't the neatest ending, it was an ending nonetheless. Clara and I had started to find a new rhythm. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. She had taken some time away from the house, giving herself space to heal. It wasn't just about Derek anymore. It was about her reclaiming her life, her independence. And while the scars of the past would remain, I could see her starting to rebuild, starting to live for herself again. As for me, I spent more time at the shop, working on old cars and enjoying the peace that came with it. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to keep me grounded, enough to give me something to focus on. The war, the limp, the betrayal, those things no longer controlled me. But what Derek had taught me, more than anything, was how fragile everything could be, how easily we could lose ourselves, lose our families, lose everything we worked for. I had spent so much of my life fighting for respect, for peace, for justice. But in the end, it wasn't about fighting, it was about letting go. I sat alone in the garage one evening, staring at the half-finished project in front of me. The headlights of an old Chevy glimmered faintly in the dim light, and I ran my hand over the smooth metal, remembering what it felt like to have control, to make something whole again. It wasn't just about fixing cars anymore, it was about fixing me. Clara came by the shop later that week. She was quiet at first, looking around at the cars, her hands stuffed into the pockets of her jacket. I could tell she was still processing everything, still figuring out where she stood in all of this. But there was a calmness to her now, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. "I've been thinking about what you said," she told me, her voice soft but steady, about forgiveness, about letting go. I didn't say anything, just let her speak. I knew she was still struggling with everything. How could she not be? But it was clear she was working through it, finding her way, just like I had. "I'm not there yet, Dad," she said, looking at me with those eyes full of uncertainty. "I'm not sure I ever be, but I'm trying. I'm trying to let go of the anger, of the hurt." "Good," I said simply. "That's all you can do. Letting go doesn't set mean forgetting, Clara. It means moving forward, not for anyone else, but for you." She nodded, a small tear slipping down her cheek. "It sets just hard. I loved him, Dad. I thought he was the one. I thought I knew him." I stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You did know him. The man you loved was real. But the man he became, he wasn't set your fault. And now you get to choose what comes next. You get to choose your own happiness." Clara Sip's shoulders trembled for a moment, but she straightened up. "And I'm not sure what that looks like yet. But I'm going to find out. And I think I'm ready to start living for myself. Really living." I smiled, proud of her. "I know you will." A few weeks later, Clara decided to take a trip. A small getaway to clear her head, to start fresh. She told me it was time for her to find herself again, to see the world without the weight of Derek's shadow hanging over her. I didn't try to stop her. I encouraged it. It was what she needed. As she packed, she paused and looked back at me. "Thanks, Dad, for everything, for being here, for not giving up on me." I looked at her, my heart swelling with pride. "You don't just need to thank me, Clara. I'm your father. I'm your father. I'm always be here." She hugged me tightly, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had done something right. After she left, I returned to the garage, my sanctuary, but it wasn't the same anymore. I wasn't just fixing cars, I was fixing parts of myself. I didn't even realize were broken, and I was learning slowly that letting go of the past wasn't just about justice, it was about peace. Derek had taken everything from us, but in the end, it was him who lost the most. He lost his family, his reputation, his life, and what was left for him. A shadow of a man who had never truly known what it meant to sacrifice, to love, to honor. I'd spent years holding on to anger, but now I understood. The real strength wasn't in fighting back. It was in choosing peace. It was in choosing to let go and move forward. And that was something Derek would never understand. I glanced at the unfinished car in front of me, the engine half repaired. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Just like me, just like Clara. We were both pieces of work in progress, but we were going to make it. Because sometimes the hardest fight isn't the one you win, it's the one you choose to walk away from. Time had passed, and the world kept turning. It always does, doesn't it? People move on, life shifts, and we adapt. Even when we think we can't. I had spent years fighting battles, some of them worth it, some of them not. But through it all, I'd come to realize something: there's more to life than winning. Sometimes the greatest strength is simply walking away and moving on. Clara came back from her trip a few weeks later, and there was a different light in her eyes. She had that look in her face, the one I hadn't seen in years. She was back, not just physically, but emotionally. She had started to rebuild her life, piece by piece. Just like I had done. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. I was working in the garage, finishing up on an old truck, when I heard the familiar sound of the door opening. I looked up, and there she was, standing in the doorway, her smile brighter than I'd seen in a long time. "Dad," she said, her voice light, "I think I'm ready to go back to work. I'm ready to start again." I put down my wrench, wiping my hands on a rag. "You sure about that?" She nodded, her eyes filled with resolve. Yeah, I said I'm ready. I said been thinking a lot about everything, the past, the future. I don't said I want to keep living in the shadow of what happened. It sips time to move forward. And for the first time in months, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had done everything I could to protect her, to guide her, and now she was finding her own way. That was all I ever wanted for her, to be free, to live her life without the burdens of the past holding her back. We spent the next few days working on the garage together, fixing up old cars and talking about everything and nothing. It was the kind of quiet peace I had longed for, the kind of life I had almost given up on. As for Derek, the once formidable man who had tried to tear everything apart, I hadn't heard from him since that meeting. He had disappeared, leaving behind only the wreckage of his own choices. The family business had been salvaged. Clara had her life back, and I was finally beginning to feel whole again. It wasn't a storybook ending. There were no grand reconciliations, no happy closure, but there was something else, something more real. There was peace. There was a quiet kind of redemption that didn't require any grand gestures. I thought about Derek every now and then, wondering where he was, what he was doing. But it didn't matter anymore. He was gone from our lives, and that was the way it was meant to be. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the horizon, Clara and I sat on the porch, just the two of us. The world was still, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel the weight of the past hanging over me. Dad, Clara said, her voice soft, I know it hasn't been easy, but I think we Seth made it through. I think, I think we Seth going to be okay. I looked at her, her face bathed in the warm light of the setting sun. She was right. We had made it through, not unscathed, but stronger for it. We had both been through the fire, and we had come out the other side, not as the people we were before, but as something new, something better. I think so too, I said, my voice steady. I think we're gonna be okay. And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed it. The next morning I woke up early, before the sun had even risen, and went to the shop. There was something about the solitude of the early hours that I found comforting. The world was still asleep, and for once it felt like time was moving at my pace. I walked through the garage, my hands brushing over the old tools and worn-out machines that had always been a part of my life. The scent of grease and metal was familiar, grounding. I wasn't just fixing cars. I was fixing pieces of myself. I stopped by one of the trucks, my hands tracing the contours of the bodywork. It was a project I'd been working on for a while, one that needed patience and care, just like everything else in my life. Just like the family, just like Clara. The repairs took time. They didn't happen overnight. But they were happening. I glanced up at the sun as it began to rise, the light spilling through the windows, casting long shadows across the shop floor. It was a new day, a fresh start. And as I stood there looking at the work I had yet to finish, I realized that maybe, just maybe, the best kind of redemption is the kind that's earned slowly, the kind that doesn't happen all at once, but bit by bit, day by day. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need for revenge. I didn't feel the need to prove anything. All I needed to do was keep moving forward, to keep working, to keep rebuilding. And I knew I would. Because sometimes the hardest fight is the one we have to have with ourselves. And sometimes the greatest victory is simply finding peace. It's funny how time has a way of making everything seem distant. When I look back now, I can hardly recognize the man I was when all of this started. The anger, the hurt, the desire for vengeance, it all feels like a memory, something that belongs to a different life. But that life shaped me. It taught me something I had never truly understood until now. It taught me the value of peace, of letting go. Clara had started working again, rebuilding her life. She was doing it on her terms now. There was no more Derek standing in the way. No more lies, no more manipulation. She was finally free, and I couldn't have been prouder of her. She was strong, stronger than I had ever given her credit for. She didn't need anyone to fight her battles anymore. She was doing it all on her own. It was a bittersweet feeling. I had always tried to protect her, to keep her safe from the world, but in the end it was her strength that carried her through. I'd done my part, but now it was time for her to step into the world on her own, to create the life she deserved. I spent my days in the shop, as I always had, but things were different now. The work no longer felt like an escape. It felt like a return to myself. The quiet, the steady rhythm of turning wrenches and fixing engines had a kind of therapeutic quality to it. It was a meditation of sorts, a way to work through the chaos that had once consumed me. I found comfort in it. The work didn't require me to think too much about the past. It didn't require me to dwell on what I had lost. It was simple. It was real. But there were days, quiet afternoons, when I would sit back and think about everything. About Derek, about the years I had spent holding on to resentment, about the toll it had taken on me, and I would wonder if he had ever really understood what he had done, if he had ever truly understood the weight of his actions. But the truth was, it didn't matter anymore. It wasn't my burden to carry. It wasn't for me to solve. Derek had to face his own consequences, and I had already done what I needed to do. One afternoon, as I was cleaning up in the garage, Clara came by again. She looked different this time. Lighter, more at ease. She had been spending more time with friends, starting to rebuild her social life, and I could see that spark of hope returning in her eyes. She was healing, slowly but surely. "Hey, Dad," she said, stepping into the garage with a smile. I sat been thinking. I turned to face her, wiping my hands on a rag. "What about—" "I think I'm ready to take the next step," she said, her voice steady. "I sat been looking at some new opportunities. A new job, maybe even a new place to live. I sat not running away from everything that happened, but I think I need to do this for myself, to start fresh." I couldn't hide my smile. She had come so far, and this was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment when she finally took control of her own life. "That sounds like a great idea, Clara," I said, my voice filled with pride. "You've got the strength to do whatever you set your mind to. I'm proud of you." She smiled back, a genuine smile, one that I hadn't seen in years. "Thanks, Dad. I know it hasn't been easy, but I think been finally starting to figure it out." I nodded, feeling a swell of emotion in my chest. "I know you are. You've always been capable of more than you realize, and no matter where you go, or what you do, you've will always have me by your side." That night, after Clara had left, I sat alone in the shop again. The quiet was soothing, the hum of the garage a constant presence. I thought about the future, about what was next. There would be no more drama, no more chaos, just peace. And maybe, just maybe, I could finally start to let go of the past entirely. I had spent too many years fighting battles I didn't need to fight. Too many years holding on to anger, trying to right wrongs that couldn't be undone. But in the end, I had learned the most important lesson of all. Peace isn't found in revenge, it's found in letting go. In moving forward, in creating something new from the ashes. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the garage, I realized that I was ready, ready to move on, ready to embrace whatever came next. It wasn't the end I had imagined, but then again, life rarely is. It wasn't about the revenge, or the justice, or the fallout. It was about the quiet moments of reflection, the quiet healing, the slow journey back to peace. And as I locked up the shop that evening, looking at the stars in the sky, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. True peace. And for the first time in a long time, I knew everything would be okay. It had been several months since Derek had left, since everything had changed. And in that time, things had slowly begun to shift, both for Clara and for me. The wounds were still there, hidden beneath the surface, but they were healing, slowly, but they were healing. Life, as it always does, moved on. Clara had found her footing again. She had a new job, a new sense of purpose, and most importantly, she had started to rebuild her life. It wasn't without its challenges, but she was doing it. She was standing tall, her head held high, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw the woman she was always meant to be: strong, independent, and free. It was everything I had hoped for her, and more. We still spent a lot of time together, mostly at the shop. Sometimes she would stop by just to sit and talk, and other times she would bring lunch and we would sit on the old wooden bench, eating and reminiscing about the past. But the difference now was that we were talking about the future, not the past, not the pain. It was no longer about what we had lost, but about what we still had. I spent my days in the garage, working on whatever car was in need of repair. It had become my refuge, my place of peace. The work wasn't glamorous, but it was honest, and every day as I fixed something, whether it was a busted engine or a faulty transmission, I felt like I was fixing something in myself. There were days when I would catch myself thinking about Derek, about how he had once been a part of this family, about how I had tried so hard to protect everything we had built. But as time passed, I realized something: I couldn't keep holding on to the past. The past didn't define me, and it certainly didn't define Clara. What defined us now was the present and the future. The future that Clara was building for herself, and the future that I was finally starting to look forward to. Clara called me one afternoon, her voice filled with excitement. "Dad, I've been looking at a house, a little place in town. I think it is time for me to take that step, to have my own space." I smiled, a proud smile. "That's Sep's great sweetheart. I think it's Sep's time too." She laughed, and I could hear the joy in her voice. "I know it's Sep's going to be a lot of work, but I feel ready. I feel like this is the next step for me." I sat back in my chair, feeling a warmth spread through me. "You Sept come so far, Clara?" I Sept, "proud of you. You Sept made it through so much, and now you Sept you're moving forward. I couldn't I too be prouder." And as I spoke those words, I realized how true they were. I had watched my daughter grow up, watched her face the hardest challenges life had to offer, and now I was watching her step into the world again, this time on her own terms. And me? I was finally at peace. I had my own space, my own work, my own quiet life. I wasn't looking over my shoulder anymore. I wasn't haunted by the past or driven by a need for revenge. I was content, and for the first time in years I could honestly say that I was happy. The garage was quieter than usual one evening, and I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. The pain, the betrayal, the long road to justice. It all seemed like a distant memory now. There were still scars, sure, but they were the kind that didn't hurt anymore, the kind that faded with time. And as I locked up for the night, I looked around one last time, my hands resting on the door. The work I had done, both in the garage and in my life, was complete. I had faced my demons, had confronted the lies, had fought for what was right, and now it was time to let go of the past. I stood there for a moment, just breathing in the night air, and for the first time I truly understood what it meant to be free, to be at peace. Clara was free. I was free, and that was all I could ask for. A few weeks later, as I stood in the driveway watching Clara move into her new home, I realized that this was the beginning of something new for both of us. The chapter with Derek was closed, and while the scars would always remain, they no longer defined us. We were moving forward together, but separately, and that was okay. As Clara waved to me from her new front porch, her face glowing with excitement and pride, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. She was finally free, and so was I. Sometimes the hardest part of the journey is not the fight itself, but the letting go. And for the first time in years, I felt like I had truly let go. It wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning.